So here we are. Okay, so I've started recording now.
Perfect, thank you. Well, welcome, Roger. I think mainly we are all avid readers of the Morning Star, so you should feel right at home. And Roger's going to talk about Cuban foreign policy, and maybe you could relate it a little bit, Roger, to the balance of power in Latin America, which is shifting massively. So over to you.
Yes. So can I just say one word
Yep.
of introduction to Roger? In case anyone doesn't know it, Roger is now the international editor of the Morning Star, where he's been there for several months now. For many years, he was associated with the group called Liberation, which was formerly the Movement for Colonial Freedom. Roger has a long background in anti-colonial politics and for the developing world. And indeed, one could possibly say that Cuba was part of that movement, that on the 1st of January 1959, the Cubans expelled the American colonialists and imperialists at the same sort of time that many other countries in the southern world were gaining their independence, although not having to fight for it normally in the same way the Cubans did. And he's also going to talk to us about a great current exponent of Cuban foreign policy, Dr. Jose Ramon Cabañas Rodriguez. Quite a mouthful that, but about whom this is how I really came to ask Roger to talk to us, because of the article he wrote about Jose Ramon in the Morning Star. And I'll hand over now to Roger.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, and thank you for the invitation. And firstly, an apology, because I know that originally we were going to do this, that I was going to come down to Brighton, but I mean that's just not been possible for me to arrange. So apologies, and I hope at some point in the future, unless I really finish you off with this contribution, that you invite me back sometime to an in-person meeting and I can do it. That's the first thing. The second thing is I am horrified that somebody would want to leave this meeting and go and see Manchester City play. As an ardent Aston Villa supporter and season ticket holder since I was little, and we gave you our best player and everything, I'm just horrified that somebody would do that. And the final thing is that it would be a very interesting discussion to have, actually, about how many countries that were colonized got their freedom, if indeed it is freedom, because that's another debate amongst many, given that many are still governed and the head of state is still the monarchy of the UK. The country that my parents are from is Jamaica, so just over the water from Cuba. You know, there was a lot of fighting going on. Over many years, a lot of resistance to colonialism for a long time, as well as a lot of resistance to, of course, slavery over many years. So that would be an interesting discussion to have sometime about why some people succeed and maybe why others don't quite succeed. But the point that I suppose I'd like to start off at, and there's no way that my voice would allow me to speak for 45 minutes tonight, although usually I could do a Fidel Castro type couple of hours easily normally. Before I get going, I'll tell you a little story about when I heard Fidel Castro speak in person, and it was the World Conference Against Racism in 2001 in Durban, South Africa. And we got there late, and Comrade Fidel had been speaking already for an hour, and then he carried on, and this boiling heat pouring down, and everybody, translators falling by the wayside, and he spoke for another hour, and then said, having concluded my opening remarks, and then carried on for another hour and a half with all of these other dignitaries sitting by the side of him waiting to speak. It was a fantastic experience just to hear the great man speak, but I'm not so sure the other dignitaries waiting to speak would share that necessarily. I suppose the starting point in my contribution is something that kind of occurred to me after I spoke to Dr. Rodriguez, and wasn't something that I put in the article, mainly because we didn't talk about it directly. But it's really this point. And it's the old Einstein kind of thing about if you carry on doing things in the same way, then you can only expect the same result, whatever the actual phrasing was. Actually, there's even dispute over whether Einstein actually said that, but anyway. But you get the drift of that. Because why that came to my mind was because clearly most of the world has been voting and has been saying for a long time, I mean, I'm talking about the vast majority of the world, as you all know, who are opposed to the sanctions against Cuba, and have been voting consistently for many decades now, again, that the sanctions should be lifted. But here they are still in place because the United States has the power basically to enforce those sanctions. So what occurred to me when I was talking to Dr. Rodriguez was there seemed to me to be an understanding from the Cubans that we needed a different way of doing things, that if they carried on just expecting the US to develop a conscience, maybe, or to accept the will of the international community, which they keep citing. They have their own mystical international community that they talk about all the time, that doesn't seem to include anywhere in the global south, really. But they continually talk about that. But if you just carried on waiting for that, then the situation's going to continue, and the hardships of the Cuban people are going to continue, because we all know, as people who follow this, that this is what is happening at the moment, is that when you take what happened during COVID-19, massive hardship, where the United States decided that they really didn't care whether or not the people of Cuba were going to suffer or not, that they were going to maintain the blockade and keep out vital equipment, vital medicines, vital equipment that was needed for the Cuban people to be able to survive the pandemic in the same way as everybody else, or most other places in the world were going to try and get through that crisis. They didn't care at all. They continued with the sanctions, and nothing changed except things got harder for the Cuban people. But the Cuban people, of course, are made of much stronger stuff than that, and managed to develop their own vaccines. Remarkable. I mean, absolutely remarkable achievement to be able to do that and to keep the death toll so low in Cuba. You'll know the numbers. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but the remarkably low death rates, and it just seemed to me that it was another example of resilience isn't a strong enough phrase for me. It's more than that. It's the way that Cuba refuses to give in to US bullying, refuses just to say, all right, well, they've got us this time. And, one of the biggest threats that's faced the world in many, many, many decades is the thing that's going to get us in the end through COVID. No, they were not going to allow that. They produced their own vaccines because of the technology that they developed over the years, because of the brilliant health system that they've got over there, because of the brilliant scientists that they've got, because of the brilliant university system that they've got that brings out these brilliant scientists and doctors who are able to produce these vaccines, and they found their way through all this. But I still kept thinking that what Dr. Rodriguez was really telling me, and I almost went back into the discussion. I almost went back into the embassy actually and had the discussion with him. But then I saw his car whiz past me and they'd whizzed him off to another meeting. And I just thought the discussions that we hinted at in terms of what is happening in the rest of the global south are really the most important things to get a grip of in this discussion, I think, because I think the moves that we are seeing at the moment across the whole global south, particularly with the BRICS initiatives, the new BRICS Bank in particular, I think is a game changer, absolute game changer, because the US is able to impose its sanctions primarily. I'm speaking to people who already know this stuff, but hopefully this helps us to have a conversation about it. But it seems to me that the creation of the new BRICS Bank in particular, and the de-dollarization that is taking place across the global south in particular, led by Brazil, led by China, but supported by Nicaragua. I had a discussion today, which will be in a paper in a few days, with the education minister from Nicaragua today, and really interesting discussion about their priorities, but also the challenges that they had. Very, very similar to the challenges in Cuba as well. But the way that the US is able to impose its will on the world is primarily through their military might, which I'll come on to in a minute, but also the power of the dollar and the use of the dollar as the main trading current reserve currency that's used for trading across the world, and including oil, of course. So then if you think about it, if then countries start saying, well, we're not going to play ball with that agenda anymore, we're not going to continue this hegemony of the US controlling everything by the power of the dollar, but actually we're going to look to try and do things differently. That is a game changer for Cuba. Absolute massive game changer, it seems to me, as it is for Nicaragua, as it is for Venezuela, as it is for, and yes, there are problems with Iran, but as it is for Iran and other countries that the US decides that it's going to sanction, often unilaterally, and then bullies the rest of the world into supporting whatever it is the US wants to do, or their world. Because, of course, what we see with a lot of the sanctions that are around now is that many of the countries of the global south actually don't support these sanctions because, frankly, many of them are just fed up with the bullying that takes place and are fed up with the US coming into their countries and ripping out all the natural resources and then deciding that if you don't like it, then they are going to take the old adage that they pretty well always use since the Monroe Doctrine was introduced, really. If you're not with us, then you're against us. And what this move for de-dollarization and the whole creation of a stronger BRICS does, which, as I understand it, Cuba is one of the countries that's looking to be part, an active part, a fundamental part, I think, of BRICS, as are a load of other nations. Then that makes a real change in international relations. It shifts the dynamic. Now, one of the things that I put in the interview with Dr. Rodriguez was that there's a lot of talk about multipolarity. And when I put that to him, one of the things that he said is that, no, we're not interested from Cuba in the idea of multipolarity, actually. We're not interested in anything that talks about having any allegiance to any particular pole. We like the idea of, you know, multilateralism, I guess. The idea that there isn't, not everything is controlled by one particular country. Now, that means that places like Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and so on are able to develop their own trade relations, are able to have their own trade relations that rely only on their local currencies, or on the currencies that looks as though is being created, called the SIR, as I understand it, the South. This looks as though it's being created through BRICS as another alternative currency of reserve instead of the dollar. And I think that's massive for Cuba. So I suppose what I'm saying, it moves beyond trying to rely on the individual resilience of the Cuban people. And this came up again today in the discussion that I had with the Nicaraguan education minister, is that, yeah, they place a great store on the idea that we need to, you know, we've got strong people who are fighting back and not prepared to be bullied and all of that. But actually, that's a big ask of people. You know, it's a big thing to ask people all the time to sacrifice. And we need to find a way out of the situation that people are in, into a way that gives more stability and more of a chance for not just the Cuban people to survive. You know, why should anybody's ambition be just to survive? You know, with everything that Cuba has got going for it, why should the ambition be just to survive? Why should anybody's ambition be just to survive, when in fact there's so many great things that can be achieved? And of course, the Cuban Revolution has absolutely achieved some massive things. You know, education system bar none in the world, I would say, a health system bar none in the world, where they are in a position where they can offer help and assistance to other countries in the world, and where you have the richest, or now just about probably the second richest country in the world, the US, deciding that now our own people in our own country, even when they're hit by a hurricane or hit by floods, they can suffer, even though the Cubans offer medical assistance to them. They don't care because the assistance is being offered by Cuba, so they're not prepared to accept that. I mean, what a way of treating your own population, that you're not even prepared to accept the help, any help of somebody, of a country, because you happen not to share their politics, but so you're prepared to see your own people suffer. So I think that the history of the Cuban Revolution, in terms of its achievements around health and education, is fantastic. Their history of providing support for liberation movements across the world, second to none. Again, vitally important. You know, I was saying before about my parents were from Jamaica. And we've got, I mean, I'll never meet a lot of the family that I've got on the continent of Africa. I don't know, because of slavery, where most of them are from. We think that some of my family are from what is now within the Cameroon, in the family of the Tikar family. But I'll never know them for sure. What I can do is offer solidarity to people in Africa What I can do is offer solidarity to people in the Caribbean. I can offer solidarity to people across the world who are in struggle, because I get the inspiration to do that because of the Cuban Revolution. That's what informed my politics from the beginning of my involvement, from in the early 1980s, when I first started getting involved in politics. It was because of the Cuban Revolution. I could see what was happening in Cuba. I could hear from my parents who told me about the way that there were some people who stood up for other people. It wasn't a natural position, actually, just to accept that things that you just let people, it was a question of survival of the fittest. It didn't have to be that way, because there were some people, and Cuba was one of the places that they always pointed to, where people stood up and said, we believe a better life is possible. We believe in solidarity. We believe in supporting other people who are in trouble. We believe that no person should be colonized, and that whatever we can do to liberate those people, we will do. And sometimes, my parents told me, people will tell you that you're wrong. People will tell you you cannot be supporting those people. They will find every excuse not to support those people, like the Palestinians. They will call you all sorts of things for giving support to people like the Palestinians. And I can't let a meeting on internationalism go without talking about what a disgrace it was last night, the way that the Israelis killed so many people, 13 people at least, with 20 plus people wounded. You'll see my article on the front page of the Morning Star about it tomorrow, and all the anger that I had about that. I had to edit out, frankly, because you can't write that way in the newspaper. But frankly, if we fail to give solidarity to the Palestinians, then we forget everything that we've learned about what Cuba is all about. And that is about, even when people call you anti-Semitic, as they've done to me in the past because of my support for the Palestinians, where people have called me all sorts because I give support to liberation causes across the world. If we allow those people to win, then we undermine, I think, everything that we've been taught by the Cuban Revolution. So I think that where we are at the moment is, it's clearly really difficult, to say the least, for the Cuban people. They are struggling to get by. The sanctions regime has hit hard, and basic equipment in schools is hard to come by. That's why Cuba Solidarity, as you will know, has done its requests for people to help and to provide materials for the schools out there. All of that is true. The hardship is true. The difficulties that people face is absolutely unimaginable, and is there for all to see. But it's deliberate from the United States. They know exactly what they're doing. They are prepared to see the Cuban people suffer. And we have to be the ones who tell the truth about what's happening. We have to be the ones who have conversations outside of the people who already agree with each other. We have to have the conversations with people who, when you first raise issues of Cuba, start saying, yeah, but that's a dictatorship or something, they just replaced one dictatorship with another in the revolution. We have to be telling people what it was like before, the way that Cuba was used as a playground for the United States, and how they are still on the island in this illegal camp that they've got called Guantanamo. And they are still there, holding people without trial for years on end, and they have the audacity to talk to other people, to preach to people across the world about human rights and so on. It's unacceptable. So we have to be the ones, I think, who go out and raise the issues, who go out and organize for more support for Cuba, but also for more support for other liberation struggles that are taking place across the country. My voice is about to give out a little bit, so hopefully that's a reasonable kind of introduction for the evening, and I look forward to our discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Roger. Right, that's focused us, I'm sure. Right, who'd like to start off with some questions or comments about all of that?
Can I? It's not just about what you were saying, Roger. Thanks very much. I thought that was really, really good to hear about the situation in your interview. I was just wondering, how likely did the Dr. Rodrigo what's his position?
He's the kind of lead on health, really.
Right.
So he was the former ambassador to the UN at one point.
I was just wondering, how likely did he think, and timescale as well, of maybe a bit of multilateralism with some other of the Latin American and Central American counterparts. Is there any information on that? Yeah,
Juan, I think things are moving really fast, actually. I think faster than the United States can cope with as well, which is probably good news, although I'll come on to the dangers around their reaction in a minute, maybe. But what we're already seeing is, since the election of Lula in particular in Brazil, we've seen a real shift in the speed, the acceleration of the development of BRICS. I should say as well, of course, BRICS is it's quite an interesting body in many ways, because of course you've got progressive organizations on there, progressive countries on there already. Brazil now, wasn't until January, of course. China on there, but you've also got India, which is far from progressive. Obviously, you got Russia on there, which for me, is absolutely not a socialist and not progressive. So there are some difficulties on there, but what I think is coalescing people together is the notion that you have to break away from the current situation, and I think it seems to me that feeling has been around for a while, because as soon as Lula got in, so January the 1st, he was kind of inaugurated as president, we've seen a real rapid move of countries, and again some difficult ones. Saudi Arabia, talking about wanting to be part of BRICS. Iran, some of these people aren't really good mates themselves, so then you saw really quickly, China bringing Saudi Arabia and Iran together, which is effectively stopping the longest conflict that we've had, the Yemen conflict, which wouldn't have stopped unless Saudi Arabia and Iran started talking together. And now they're talking about coming together in BRICS as well. Really rapid move from a lot of the Latin American countries talking about joining in as well, because again, they're seeing the benefit, I think, of a new way of doing business and removing the power that the United States had. So, there was nothing like a time frame that was given to me or anything like that. But what I can see with the stuff that I look at every day is a real rapid shift in a change of relations between countries that up until a couple of months ago weren't talking to each other. Syria, for example, back in the Arab League really quickly, Nobody would have predicted that just a few weeks ago, really. And then you started to see just over the last few months, really, just things started to shift. And I think people see a possibility of a move away from the power of the United States. Now, one of the things about the power of the United States, of course, and if Saudi Arabia then start talking about removing, coming away from petrodollars, which is what they are talking about, and just having oil dealt with not in terms of dollars, but in terms of local currencies again, that is a major thing. And it's a major shift, because and then the US has to decide how to respond to that, because it's having its economic power taken away from it. And it's got another doctrine as well as the Monroe Doctrine, which, as you all know, has a massive applicability to Latin America, and Latin America is US's backyard, so-called, and all the rest of it. But he has this other one as well. It's called the full spectrum dominance doctrine. And that, for me, is possibly even more important than the Monroe Doctrine, as important as that one is, because what that other doctrine says is wherever in the world our economic, political, and military interests are threatened, we will take action to defend it. And it's not, but it's also about business in the United States. Is about protecting the economy for them, because there's no real distinction, as you all know, between big business in the US and the US government, bought and paid for by, politicians, just bought and paid for by the major companies. But what you so if they're prepared, so they are saying to everybody, if you threaten us, we will take action to defend. We will take action to defend our interests. So if America runs on oil is no longer going to be traded necessarily in dollars. United States will see that as undermining them. They're going to they either do one of two things, it seems to me. They negotiate and be all reasonable and try and work out a best way of living in a new world, which, as we all know, is not the way the United States operates, or they lash out. So then they have to decide who to lash out against. And part of the reason for the friction, to say the least, with China at the moment is because China is the major threat to US economic dominance on the planet. So we're in for interesting, but also I think dangerous times. But I don't think that the countries of the global south, of which Cuba, I think, is just an inspiration to so many of those countries, I think that they don't see carrying on with the way things have been going as being tenable. I think they all realize that they have to move on and try and find a way of being able to deal with a new world. What's really interesting, I think, is the way that some of the European countries have started to cozy up much more, just gradually, but starting to cozy up towards China in particular, because they see the way that the ball is rolling. They see the economic dominance of China, and even noises from the UK government, not massive, but some noises. Germany, foreign secretary, the foreign minister from the foreign minister of Germany was meeting with the Chinese foreign minister today, and I think that's one of my articles in tomorrow's paper as well. And there's more and more of these meetings. Macron recently in China having meetings as well. These are not just kind of shake hands meetings and nice warm greetings. There's always reasons for these meetings to take place. And yes, some of it's about sussing out where the Chinese are coming from, but it's also a recognition that the global South has had enough of the way that things were have been going. That's why many of the countries of the francophone countries of Africa, for example, have told the French to get out, just shifted them out. So I think things are on the move massively.
Massively encouraging. We've got to time out, I think, and come back in. Isn't that correct, Pauline?
Yeah, that's why I put my hand up. That's correct, indeed. So if we can all leave now, I'll end it now, and then everyone come back in again, please.
Thank you, Roger. Won't see you, but I'm an Arsenal supporter, so I'm rooting for Real Madrid tonight.
I see. Okay.
Thank you very much. It was brilliant.
Okay. See everyone else in a minute.
See you in a minute.